Hi, my name is Josh Gervais. Welcome to Selective Session. I'm going to be doing a detailed video series on how to take old Hondas and convert them to electric hub drive Hondas. Throughout this series, we're going to discuss everything from what donor bikes you can use, what modifications you need to make to the frame and swing arm, what parts you're going to need, how to do all the fabrication, assemble the bike, and ultimately get the bike on the road. My experience comes in doing two bikes, a CT90 and a C200. These bikes got some press, and I had a ton of questions. We're going to answer all those questions and much more. My personal career started as a professional snowboarder. I segued that into working in the ski industry for over 25 years, doing top events such as the X Games and the US Open. I've also worked for all of the top resorts, building half pipes, terrain parks, and doing marketing. Currently, my wife and I have a marketing and advertising agency in Reno, Nevada, but I'm always looking for fun, creative projects like this to do. I built a dirt bike track for my kids in the front yard. I'm restoring some Land Rovers. I restored a cool old two-stroke Suzuki. I build furniture in the house, and I'm generally just looking to project. Hopefully this video series will inspire you to build a vintage electric Honda. Now let's go check out my bikes. The first bike, late 60s CT90. This bike has a 3,000 watt hub motor, 72 volts, 35 amp hours. It has a YF controller, SW900 display, mountain bike hydraulic disc brakes, upgraded front wheel. This one was very difficult, LED lights, and ultimately a really fun bike to ride. This bike goes for about an hour and a half to 2 hours depending on how you ride it, and a top speed of 45 miles an hour. The second bike, C200. This bike has 3,000 watt hub motor, 30 amp hour battery, but it's also 72 volts. This has a Sabaton controller, much nicer controller, an NB display, LED lights, but it has a motorcycle rear brake. This brake is a huge improvement. Overall, the build on this bike is much nicer. The electronics are much nicer. This bike only goes an hour to an hour and a half because of the smaller battery, but it does have a higher top speed. The top speed on this bike is 48 to 50 miles an hour. Both super fun. Tons of torque. Now let's go check out the parts. We're going to break parts out into 5 different sections: battery, hub drive motor and wheel, controller, brakes, and everything else. So batteries. If you've done any research, you can find there's so many different opinions on batteries. You can watch videos all day long on what to use. Based on value, I've chose to go with China cell batteries. I did the research I could do on these. I checked the factory, the specs, talked to people that have used them, and ultimately have had good experience with these. So the specs on the BMS and the battery I'm using, it has a 50 amp average discharge rate, 120 amp peak rate, and a 4 amp charge rate. Not bad. They're 72 volt batteries. Let's check them out. This is a 30 amp hour battery. The wiring sequence goes from the battery through a fuse, then the contactor, then the controller. The other bike has a 35 amp hour battery. The runtime difference is anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how you ride it. The rear hub and wheel, it's an NBP 72 volt 3,000 watt rear hub. It's mounted to a 17 inch 1.6 wide wheel. I have these on both bikes. They work really well, no issues. It definitely performs better with the Sabaton controller. The YF, it tends to get a little bit hot. My controller is here under the seat. I'll show you it a bit later. But it's the Sabaton 80 amp controller. When you buy the rear motor, it comes with a controller, so you can spec which one you want. It also comes with the display. You can spec that. Comes with a throttle. Comes with brakes we're not going to use, and a few other parts. So the brakes. Well, I've done a big improvement on this bike from the blue bike. This bike has the motorcycle brakes. The biggest two parts to overcome was an adapter to go from the 6-hole mountain bike to the 4-hole motorcycle, and also a caliper mount. On my old bike, I've got mountain bike style brakes. So this is a mountain bike caliper. I welded a bracket here for that caliper, and it's got a 6-bolt mountain bike style rotor. This bike fades really bad. When you get going fast and you cram these brakes on, they heat up You don't get a lot out of it. So this was a huge improvement. I'm going to show you guys how to do this whole process. It's great. So beyond that, it's all the other parts. Well, you need a lot of parts. You need a front wheel. This front wheel right here, it was very difficult to do. I put it on my blue bike. The way that it's configured, it's larger, and the way that it comes out in reverse. So the cable comes out in reverse. So I don't recommend buying one of these. I've been able to source a more factory style where you have to use the old brake parts, but it bolts right up. The only thing you have to do is you have to shorten the axle spacers a bit, but it's great. This is also a 17-inch. This is a 1.4 wide wheel, so it's a little bit skinnier in the back because the back is a 1.6, but it's a really easy conversion. Other important parts you're going to need, brakes, right? We talked about that, but you're going to need the brake levers. You're going to need hydraulic motorcycle style. I buy these levers with the switch for the rear brake already incorporated in it. So basically what this does is when you pull it, it lights the brake up once you have it all wired together. For the cable lever, I buy a similar one with the switch already incorporated in it. So I wire these two together. When you pull on it, you get a brake light. So that's a great improvement. I upgrade the bars to a Speedway style bar. That's a cool improvement over the taller bars that typically come with the bikes. Again, the display, that comes when you buy the controller and the rear wheel. Brake parts that you're going to need a front cable. You're going to need a rear hydraulic line. The rear caliper and mount, which we'll talk about more later. You're going to need things like a horn. And this spacer here, this typically cracks. It's a cover and spacer for the headset, so I just buy that new. Other items that you're going to need, so you need to charge the bike. This is an external charge port. On my blue bike, I have a cable that you have to plug in. So basically you remove the side cover, plug in the cable, and charge it. On my gray bike, you flip this open, plug it in, charge it. It's a much cleaner option. You're going to need things like a key switch if you want to go that route. And if you're going to go the key switch route, you'll need a contactor. This was the single biggest improvement I made from the first bike to the second bike. I added this contactor, and this allows for a keyless disconnect of the battery to the motor so it doesn't bleed off. On my blue bike, I actually have to pull the side cover off and disconnect it if I want to disconnect that whole system. You're going to need some switches for all your lights. Which ones are you going to use? Are you going to use a all-in-one style with the horn, turn indicator, and lights? Or are you going to do like I did on the gray bike where I have some independent switches to try and clean it up and simplify it a bit? What wiring are you going to do? Specifically what lights are you going to have? LED, non-LED, turn indicators, no turn indicators. Some states require the turn indicators. Nevada actually doesn't on this old bike. You're going to need a turn indicator switch. If you use an old style rear brake light, you'll probably want to upgrade it to LED as I did. You'll need a reducer from 72 volts to 12 volts. So that's important to run all your lighting. And then what plugs are you going to use? I use the YT90 plugs. Those work pretty well, but you have a lot of options. You might need to use a junction box depending on the run from your motor to your controller and where that's actually going to be. Fuse if your battery doesn't come with a fuse. And then other parts you're going to need to buy new. These parts are some accessories, side covers. You can get cowlings for the bikes, foot pegs, bushings for the swing arm if you need that, head badge, racks, and all kinds of other things. Shocks, there's a few different options for the shocks out there. And then what paint you're going to use. And the paint really, gives the bike the overall look. If you're spending good money to buy all these parts and put a cool bike together, I recommend using a 2-part paint rather than a rattle canning the bike. Tires and tubes, really important part. This gives the bike a finished look. Originally on my gray bike here, I bought this Michelin tire, and when you mount it up, it actually comes out really skinny based on the sidewall and how it fits. So I scrapped that idea and found some better tires for that. We're going to be going over your battery box, and how you build your battery box, how that all gets assembled. I typically buy all new bolts for the bikes for everything that I can find. And then your foot pegs, I use this round stock. That's a real simple solution. You'll have to clean up some parts, as I mentioned. So you'll have to clean up this brake cover part. This is the mount for the handlebars. Not only do I clean this up, I make a small modification to it. There's a rubber bushing that goes in here, and that rubber bushing can get really wiggly over time. So I modify that so the bike has a more rigid and strong feel. Modifications you're going to do to the frame, so you can shave a lot of the brackets off of it. This was for the old airbox. That can come off. You can cut the locks off if you don't want them. I always remove the fender, as I did on the blue bike. You can cut some other brackets off that you're no longer going to need, but we'll go into all those details. Specific modifications to make the bike actually work. So you're going to modify the rear swing arm. The old style rear wheel had an axle that slid in. Well, ours doesn't. So you have to actually cut the back off here and slide the rear wheel in. The rear wheel has a few issues. So this is 170 millimeters, and the new rear wheel is 150 millimeters. Also, the new rear wheel is 10 millimeters high, where that needs to go in the dropouts. And these are 15 millimeters on this side and 12 millimeters on this side. So you're going to need to take up that space. Also, some of the C200s and C100 bikes have thinner dropouts. So the CT90s have 12 millimeters, and those other bikes have skinnier ones. So if you don't reinforce these when you're taking up this space, it can break, as you can see in this photo. I had to go through and actually add some material and really strengthen this bike to make this all work out. But we now have a much better solution. It's one piece. It takes up the space, vertical and horizontal, and it also adds the brake bracket in here so you can mount the caliper right up to it. So a cool solution. You'll need to add a battery box. I add my battery box right here. I feel like it makes the bike ride the best because this is where the weight of the motor was. Aesthetically, I feel like it looks the most natural, again, because this is where the motor was. There's other options out there that I've seen where people mount it where the battery was. Where the gas tank was, or back on the back rack. But it's going to be a wheelie king if you do this. So modifying the frame, we need to make some cuts to the frame. You do not want to mess with the VIN, so be very careful. And I've got two options. There's a bolt-up option, and there's a weld-on option. So we're going to go over that. Other things you'll need to do to prep the frame. So remove all of the parts, every single part from this frame. You can go through at that point and fill some of these holes by welding them and clean up the frame in any way you want. Then I go through and I weld anything I want to weld to it, and then sandblast the whole frame. So sandblasting, that's a really messy process. I do have a sandblast rig that we're going to talk about, but you can take your bike somewhere and have it sandblasted. Following the sandblasting, I do some Bondo and fill the whole frame, and then you're going to do your paint. So that's really an overview of what the project's going to take. Next, we're going to talk about donor bikes. So what donor bikes you can use, and then we're going to do some test riding of my bikes. So until next time, have a good day.